The dog had been destroying kennels for 11 days straight. Not nipping, not growling, destroying. Kennel doors bent off hinges. 3 handlers sent to the infirmary. One with a broken wrist, one with 32 stitches across his forearm. The third just rattled, saying the dog had looked at him like he wasn't even worth killing. The Belgian Malinois they called Ghost had arrived at the naval training facility outside Coronado 6 weeks prior, transferred from a unit that no longer existed on any official paperwork. Nobody knew exactly what Ghost had done overseas. The files were either classified, redacted, or simply gone. What they knew was that Ghost was 8 years old, decorated twice for combat service, and currently the most dangerous animal on the base. Lieutenant Commander Weston had seen a lot in his 12 years running the K9 program. He'd worked with dogs that had been through Fallujah, dogs pulled from rubble in Mosul, dogs that had watched their handlers die and somehow kept working. He'd never seen anything like Ghost. The Malinois wasn't scared. That was the thing that unsettled Weston most. A scared dog you could work with. Fear had edges you could find, pressure points you could ease. Ghost wasn't scared of anything on this base. He was angry. Systematically, deliberately, intelligently angry. He'd let a handler approach within 10 feet, then explode without warning. He'd eaten through a chain-link partition that was rated for 200-pound pressure. He'd stopped eating altogether for 4 days, and when the vet tech finally managed to sedate him for examination, the dog had somehow metabolized the tranquilizer twice as fast as any animal she'd ever treated, and was standing upright and showing teeth again before she'd finished her notes. Chief Petty Officer Aldana had suggested putting Ghost down. She'd said it quietly, professionally, with the clipboard against her chest and her eyes flat, the way she said everything she didn't want to say. Weston had told her to give him 2 more weeks. He didn't know why he'd said it. Instinct, maybe. The same instinct that had kept him alive in places he still didn't talk about at dinner. The call came on a Tuesday morning, which Weston would remember later. Always the Tuesdays, he'd think. The days that don't announce themselves. A man had been standing outside the perimeter fence for 45 minutes. One of the base's perimeter guards had flagged it. Not loitering, exactly. Just standing. An older man in a canvas work jacket, the kind with the corduroy collar worn soft. Jeans that had seen better years. Boots that had seen better decades. He had his hands in his pockets, and he was looking at the K9 facility with an expression the guard couldn't quite classify. Not threatening. Not curious in a tourist way. More like a man looking at a house he used to live in. The guard had asked him twice if he needed help. The man had said no thank you both times, politely, without moving. On the third approach, the man had said something. He'd said, "That dog in there, is his name Ghost?" That was when they called Weston. He walked out to the fence himself. He looked at the man and saw someone in his mid-60s, maybe older, lean in the way that men who've spent decades on their feet are lean. Not gym lean, work lean, the kind that doesn't go away even when the work stops. White hair clipped short, a jaw that had taken a few hits over the years and healed slightly wrong, eyes that were gray-green and very still, the kind of still that isn't passivity. It's a stillness that gets trained into a person, the kind you earn in places where moving wrong gets you killed. "You know this animal?" Weston asked. "I trained him," the man said. From 8 weeks old, his name was Edmund Kohler. Not that Weston would learn that right away. The man offered it only when asked, and without the particular quality most civilians used when introducing themselves to officers, that slight adjustment of posture, the performance of respect. Kohler offered his name the way he might offer the time. Just a fact. Weston studied him. "Mr. Kohler, just Kohler's fine Kohler. This dog has hospitalized 3 of my handlers. He's aggressive beyond any protocol we have. He's been evaluated by 2 behavioral specialists and a veterinary psychiatrist, and none of them have been able to get within safe proximity." Kohler nodded once. "How long has he been here?" 6 weeks. Before that?" Weston paused. "The unit he came from was disbanded. There was a transition period, several months in a holding facility in Virginia." Something moved across Kohler's face. Not surprise. Something older than surprise. "How many months?" "Approximately 9. Kohler was quiet for a moment. He looked past Weston toward the kennel building, a low concrete structure with narrow ventilation windows, and his eyes went to a specific window the way a man's eyes go to a specific window when he already knows the layout of the building from memory. 9 months in holding, 6 weeks here," he said. "That's 15 months. That's a long time for an animal that spent his whole life with one unit, one routine, One person telling him where to stand. He paused. He's not broken, he's waiting. Waiting for what? Kohler looked at him. For someone to come back. Weston crossed his arms. He was not a man who got pushed around easily, and he felt something in him resist. The instinct that every commanding officer develops, that internal friction against being told what's what by someone outside the chain. But there was something about the way Kohler stood that made Weston's instincts go quiet. Not deference, something more like recognition. What was your unit? Weston asked. Kohler smiled just slightly. The paperwork on that is probably in the same place as Ghost's. Weston stared at him for a long moment. Then he said, "Come inside." Senior Chief Bellamy was not pleased. Bellamy ran logistics for the K-9 program and had opinions about everything, delivered at volume and at length, and his opinion about Edmund Kohler was that he was a liability, a civilian who'd wandered up to a secure facility with a story, and that letting him near a compromised animal was the kind of thing that ended careers. "Sir," with respect, Bellamy said, following Weston down the corridor at a clip that was almost insubordinate, "we don't know this man. We don't know his clearance. We don't know his background. He won't even state a branch of service. He could be anyone. He could be a journalist. He could be—" "He's not a journalist," Weston said. "How do you know that?" Weston pushed open the door to his office. Journalists ask questions. This man answered them. That stopped Bellamy briefly. "I want a 20-foot perimeter maintained," Weston continued. "I want Aldana watching from the observation bay. I want the situation documented because, yes, if this goes wrong, I want everything on record. And I want you to stop arguing with me, Senior Chief, because that dog is going to be put down in 8 days if nothing changes, and right now this is the only option on the table." Bellamy pressed his lips together. He was not happy. He left. They walked Kohler to the exterior yard, not the main training ground, a smaller adjacent enclosure used for behavioral assessment. Ghost was brought out by 2 handlers, both suited in protection gear that made them look like astronauts, both moving with the particular ginger care of people who had already been hurt once and did not want to be hurt again. The dog came out hard, coiled, silent, eyes tracking everything at once. He moved like a thing that was deciding what to destroy first. Kohler stood at the far end of the enclosure. He had declined the protective gear. Aldana had tried to insist, and he'd declined again, still politely, and Weston had, with some misgiving, allowed it. Kohler stood with his hands loose at his sides, not in his pockets anymore, and he watched the dog the way a person watches a fire, with attention and patience, and without alarm. Ghost locked onto him immediately. The Malinois went still, the kind of still that precedes violence, muscle memory under tension, weight forward on the front legs, hackles a ridge of dark fur from the base of the skull to the mid-spine. The 2 handlers edged toward the gate. Aldana, watching from the bay above, had one hand on the radio. Ghost took 3 steps toward Kohler. Kohler didn't move. He let the dog look at him. Ghost's nostrils were working, that particular focused scenting that Malinois do when they're reading a person, layering information, building a picture that has nothing to do with eyesight. He was reading 16 months of questions into the smell of one man standing 60 feet away. Then Kohler said the name. Not loudly, not with command inflection, not with the clipped authority trainers use, not with the rising pitch people use to coax animals. He said it the way you say the name of someone you've been thinking about every day for a year and a half. Ghost. The dog stopped. In the observation bay, nobody breathed. Ghost's head dropped 2 inches, not submission, just confusion. The physiological recalibration of an animal whose body is catching up to what his nose already knew. He took 1 step, another. His tail, which had been rigid, held flat like a weapon, moved once, not a wag, a question. Kohler lowered himself slowly to one knee. He put one hand out, palm up, and waited. Ghost covered the remaining distance in 4 seconds. He hit Kohler with his full weight, both front paws on the man's shoulders, and Kohler absorbed it, barely rocked back, like he'd been ready for exactly this, and the dog shoved his face into the side of Kohler's neck and made a sound that the handlers would describe later in different ways, none of which quite captured it. One said it sounded like a dog whimpering. One said it sounded like something being released. Aldana, in her notes, wrote simply, vocalization consistent with reunion response. Kohler had both arms around the dog. He was talking to him, low and quiet, and nobody in the enclosure could make out the words. Ghost was trembling. Not fear trembling, not aggression, The full-body tremor of a highly trained animal that has spent 15 months in a state of sustained alert and is, for the first time, standing down. Bellamy, at the gate, said nothing for a long moment. Then, quietly, in a voice that didn't sound like Bellamy at all, "Well, it took the better part of an hour before Ghost would tolerate anyone else in the enclosure. Even then he stationed himself between Kohler and everyone else, not aggressive, just positioned, clear about where he stood in the geometry of the situation." Weston waited until the handlers had led the dog, calm now, head down, the dangerous electricity gone out of him, back to the kennel before he sat down with Kohler in the small consultation room off the training yard. Aldana brought coffee. Kohler took it with both hands, and for a moment he just held it, and Weston thought, "This man is tired, not today tired. The bone tired of someone who has been carrying something for a long time." "How long did you work him?" Weston asked. 6 years. Got him at 8 weeks from a breeder in the Czech Republic. Ran him through basic imprinting, drive development, the full program, bite work, detection, off-leash obedience in environments you don't want to know about. Kohler looked at his coffee. "He's the best working dog I've ever seen. Not because he's fast or his bite pressure or his tracking. Because he thinks. He reads situations and adapts. In the field that's rarer than people know. Why were you separated?" Kohler was quiet for a beat. "Medical. I had a cardiac event in the field. Nothing dramatic, no Hollywood moment. Just my heart deciding it had worked enough overtime. I was medevaced, spent 3 months in recovery, and by the time I cleared medical the unit had been stood down and Ghost had already been moved into the reassignment pipeline." He set the cup down. "I tried to track him through official channels. You can imagine how that went. How did you find him?" "Friend of a friend. Someone who knew someone who'd heard about an animal causing problems at a facility near Coronado." He looked at Weston evenly. "I drove 14 hours. I wasn't going to call ahead." Weston thought about that. He thought about a man driving 14 hours on a rumor, showing up at a perimeter fence in a work jacket, standing there for 45 minutes just looking, not demanding anything, just being present. "What do you want, Kohler? Take him home." Weston exhaled slowly. "That's not as simple." "I know it's not simple." There was no sharpness in Kohler's voice, just the same level patience. "I know there's paperwork and protocol and probably 3 people who need to sign off before I can walk that dog out of here. I know you have a program to run, and I'm a complication you didn't ask for." He looked directly at Weston. "But that dog is going to keep hurting people, or you're going to put him down, and either way you lose a decorated combat animal who has done things for this country that the country is never going to know about. I'm offering you a third option." The room was quiet. Through the thin wall they could hear Ghost in the kennel, not destruction, not the scraping and slamming of the past 11 days. A dog pacing, settling, pacing again. The sound of an animal recalibrating. "I'll need your full service record," Weston said finally. "Whatever actually exists. I can make some calls. I'll need a home inspection, standard adoption." "Fine. And Kohler." Weston looked at him. "This doesn't happen in a day." "I know." Kohler stood, picked up his coffee cup, and set it on the edge of the desk, with a care that suggested he'd spent a lifetime making sure he didn't leave messes behind him. "I waited 15 months. I can wait a little longer." The paperwork took 19 days. Bellamy, who had appointed himself unofficial skeptic throughout the process, had run a background check on Edmund Kohler, and come back to Weston's office, looking like a man who had picked up a rock, expecting to find nothing and found a bear. He'd set a single sheet on the desk and said, "Sir," and nothing else, and Weston had read it, and understood completely why Kohler had smiled at the question about his branch of service. The details were sparse, deliberately, professionally sparse, the kind of sparse that is its own information. 23 years of service. Deployments in locations listed only by year. Commendations whose descriptions were entirely redacted. A retirement at 58, listed as medical voluntary. And a notation buried in the middle that meant nothing to most people and a great deal to Weston. A specific task force designation that he'd seen exactly twice before in his career, both times on files that required special handling. Kohler hadn't been a soldier who worked with a dog. He'd been something considerably more specific, and the dog had been part of that specificity, and they had functioned as a single unit in conditions that Weston suspected he would never fully understand, even if someone sat down and explained them to him. He called Kohler that evening. "The paperwork is moving," he said. "Appreciate it," Kohler said. "One question, off the record." A pause. Go ahead. Ghost, the name, did you give him that? A longer pause. Then, he gave it to himself. First time I ran him on a night operation, no moon, heavy cloud cover, in a situation I can't describe to you. He moved through that environment like he wasn't there. Like he was made of the darkness. Another pause, quieter. I started calling him Ghost and it stuck. Weston didn't say anything for a moment. He's doing better, eating again. Let Aldana do a full examination this morning. I know, Kohler said. She texted me. Weston almost laughed. Of course she did. On the 19th day, Edmund Kohler drove back to Coronado in the same truck he'd arrived in. The one with the slight rust at the wheel wells and a back seat that had been partially disassembled to accommodate a dog crate that was, by any reasonable measure, extremely large. He signed the final transfer documents in Weston's office. Bellamy shook his hand, briefly, with an expression of someone who had revised their opinion and was not entirely comfortable with the revision. Aldana walked with Kohler to the kennel. She'd already said goodbye to Ghost twice, which she mentioned to nobody. She opened the kennel run and stepped back, and Kohler stepped forward and didn't say anything at all, just crouched down and waited. And Ghost came to him at a dead run, and they went through it again, that collision of 80 pounds of working dog meeting one man who was ready for it. And this time there was no trembling. This time Ghost was simply there, immediately and completely, in the way that a very good dog is with the one person who is fully their person. They walked out to the parking lot together. Kohler opened the truck's rear door. Ghost looked at the crate, looked at Kohler, and got in with the businesslike efficiency of a dog who had spent years loading into vehicles in the dark and knew how this part worked. Kohler closed the door. He turned to find Weston standing there, which surprised him. He hadn't heard the man follow them out. Where are you going? Weston asked. Montana. Got a place up near Hav, 40 acres, not much going on. Kohler looked at the truck, then back at Weston, which is exactly the point. Weston nodded slowly. He's going to need time. So am I, Kohler said. He offered his hand and Weston took it. It was a brief handshake, firm, the kind between people who don't need to perform the thing they respect about each other. Kohler got in the truck. Through the rear window, Weston could see Ghost already standing in the crate, nose to the wire mesh, reading the air coming in through the partially cracked window, reading the outside, preparing. The truck pulled out of the lot, turned onto the access road, and disappeared past the tree line. Weston stood there for a moment in the Coronado morning, the marine layer still thick off the Pacific, the base beginning to move through its rhythms around him. Vehicles, voices, the distant sound of someone running a dog through an obstacle course on the far side of the facility. Bellamy appeared at his elbow. Think he'll be all right? The dog? Weston looked at the empty road where the truck had been. He thought about a man who had driven 14 hours on a roomer and stood at a fence in a canvas jacket and waited. He thought about what it meant to train something from 8 weeks old, to run it through the darkest places the world had, to come back for it across 15 months of silence and closed doors and bureaucratic obstruction, and still be standing there, at the fence, with your hands in your pockets and your face quiet. Yeah, Weston said. He'll be all right. He went back inside. In the kennel building, the run that had held Ghost for 6 weeks was empty and clean, the door standing open the way doors stand open when something has finally been resolved. Somewhere on the 15 North, a truck moved through the California morning with a man who didn't talk much, and a dog who'd spent 15 months waiting to hear one voice, and they were going to Montana together, and that was enough.